Bienvenue à cette soirée sur les polyglottes. Welcome to this polyglot evening that we organize with my colleagues who are going to introduce themselves on the occasion of the European Days of Languages.
Muy buenas tardes, bienvenidos a este encuentro de políglotas. Good afternoon, welcome to this polyglot meeting. I am Pedro Eusebio, the director of Instituto Cervantes in Manchester. And I would like only to stress something that is very obvious, but how important and how enjoyable it is to learn as many languages as you can. So I'm sure that you will enjoy very much this evening. Thank you for being there.
Buonasera e benvenuti a tutti. Sono Manuela Costanzo from the Società Dante Alighieri in Manchester. It is a special evening and very interesting, and I believe that you will enjoy really the event. Buona serata.
Well, this evening we are going to have two polyglots talking and speaking with us, and I'm going to introduce polyglot Andreas G. Wolff. Andreas is originally German, holds a BA in Gaelic language and culture and an MA in an international journalist. He is now a video journalist with the BBC in Scotland, working in English and Gaelic. At home, he speaks Spanish and Italian, the native language of his wife, Jessica. A self-confessed language Yankee, he is also fully proficient in French and has a colloquial proficiency in Russian and Portuguese. He has a basic knowledge of Mandarin, Irish, and most recently, Northern Frisian. Andreas has previously taught adult Gaelic language classes and is certified by the International Association of Hyperpolyglots, HIPIA. He is president of the Tainilt Gaelic Choir, and my friend Lucille from the Alliance Française is going to introduce Richard Simcott.
Hi, so we are delighted to have Andreas with us today, and we're also delighted to have Richard Simcott. He's a British polyglot. He has studied over 50 languages, which makes him one of the most multilingual people in the United Kingdom. And the Goethe Institute also gave him the title Ambassador for Multilingualism. Richard was born in Chester. He grew up in the English-Wales border and now lives in North Macedonia. And he is the original founder of the Polyglot Conference, which is a conference that gathers every year polyglots from around the world and more generally anybody who loves languages. So Richard has many years of consulting experience on languages, and he regularly offers his expertise on multilingual and multinational projects. And he manages a popular Facebook page called Speaking Fluently. So we are very delighted to have both of these speakers tonight.
Buonasera. I would like to start the conversation with Andreas and Richard by asking them to talk about the very concept of being a polyglot and to clarify a bit what it means to be fluent with languages. Grazie.
Einen schönen guten Abend. Good evening, everybody. Bonsoir. Buenas tardes. Buonasera. Yes, well, bilingualism is something, I guess, which in the UK is widely considered unusual. But we have to be aware of the fact that multilingualism is actually the norm in many countries around the world. You don't have to go very far. Belgium, Switzerland, most people will speak at least 3 languages. And if you go a little bit further, especially in Africa, I've found that most people will speak 4 or 5 languages. That's quite normal. Also in Scotland, there's often a debate about bilingual road signs, but in some other parts of the world, trilingual and even quadrilingual road signs are quite common. For example, in Singapore, most signs are quadrilingual, and indeed most announcements on the metro in Singapore are quadrilingual. So it's not so unusual. The other point I wanted to make about polyglotism is, because I get asked that quite a lot, don't you get confused between all these languages? Yes, at the beginning you do. I found, especially between Italian and Spanish, when I started, I learned Spanish first and then picked up Italian, and there was quite a bit of porridge going around in my head for some time, and I got mixed up between the two. But over time, it seems if you practice the two beside each other, your brain does adapt magically, and in the end, you do manage to keep them separate. Now, that's possibly understandable because Spanish and Italian are so similar, but I even found that the same was true. I studied Gaelic, as one of the introducers kindly pointed out, and then continued to work on my Russian, and I got confused between those two, although they're not even remotely similar. So I guess, yeah, the answer is, if you want to learn several languages, absolutely go for it and just stick with it. And making mistakes is okay.
Being a polyglot is not something that I ever imagined or considered for myself. The word polyglot itself is a Greek word which really means many tongues, polyglotis in Greek. And it's a word that in English is not that common, but in French is used all the time for anybody who speaks another language. Polyglot, ah, t'es polyglot, toi, you're a polyglot. And that was the first time I actually heard the word polyglot was in France, when somebody described me as such. And I just, okay, well, maybe that's what I am. I had no idea whatsoever. I'd heard of multilingual, that's more common in English, multilingualism and being multilingual. And as Andreas rightly said, there are a number of multilingual countries around the world. Places like Luxembourg, where you grow up speaking Luxembourgish, French and German, and you go through the school systems, moving between language to the language. And then you take on your other languages that you learn, like English or maybe some other foreign languages. Now, this for me is where there is a slight difference in my head. And I think also in English now, in the language community, I hope that other people would agree with me. The Latin word multilingual, which also means many languages, for me has a feeling of naturally speaking a number of languages. So like people in Luxembourg, they would be described as multilingual. They wouldn't necessarily be described as a polyglot country. Polyglots, from my point of view, because it's such a niche word in the English language, has taken on more of a meaning of learning languages that you don't necessarily need to learn for your life. So you go out of your way to learn languages that are not really needed for your work or your home, for your community. That would definitely be something that I can really relate to as somebody who has done just that. My origins are that I have a heritage language of Welsh, and I have a home language from my childhood of English. But now my home language is Macedonian. And I also speak French, Spanish, and German at home with my daughter. So this has been a thing that's gone from being a polyglot to also incorporating multilingualism into my family life. And learning languages has been a life changer. The bridges between languages help me to better understand languages that I already speak, because you see the links from language to language. And I'm sure all of you know, you hear words that end in T-I-O-N in English, you then see those words again and again in Spanish, in French, in Portuguese, in other Latin languages, because that's where we've borrowed them from. If we look at our bodies and we see our hand, it's the Germanic hand, finger, Ellenbogen, arm. All of these words connect us, not just as linguistically, but also you see the connections between the communities, and they build bridges from one country to another, from one community to another. And this is why I love languages, and this is why I will always continue to learn more.
Thank you. And so this is your experience. So in a more broader perspective, why becoming a polyglot or a multilingual? Which are the motivation and the aim that underline the goals for learning languages?
Well, I sometimes get invited into schools to give them a wee chat, and there I like to tell the story that I was fascinated by the James Bond movie, You Only Live Twice, where James Bond, where Miss Moneypenny rushes to him as he's about to board a private jet and to fly off to Japan. And she says, oh, I've got a book here, Instant Advanced Japanese for you. And he just turns around in this, well, in his usual manner and says, Miss Moneypenny, don't you know that I studied modern languages at Oxford? And then he goes off on his plane and flies to Japan. And of course doesn't take the book. I guess in a way I thought it was very cool to speak languages, and that's. But there are loads of other motivations. I like the intricacies of languages. My favorite term is in Spanish, and it's a term which is only used in Venezuela, I think. Matthias can maybe correct me, I see you there from Argentina, but they have a term called full chola. It's actually a mixture of English and Spanish. Full comes from the English full, and chola is flip-flop. So full chola means you go at full speed. And I imagine the Venezuelan sitting, in his car with the flip-flop on the gas, driving to the beach. I just think it's a great picture, full chola. But maybe more, a little bit more seriously, I think learning languages is just a great conversation starter. They give you the keys to the town. And I could never imagine visiting a country without at least learning a few words in the language. In the first place, what it tells people is, I don't take it for granted that you speak English or that you speak my language, but I want to make an effort to understand your language and culture as well. And I always try to at least learn a little conversation which I can have with people, hello, how are you? I'm fine, and you? And actually the little and you bit is often the bit that's missing in all the language guides. If you look it up, nobody tells you how to ask back for some reason. I also love to ask people, well, how do you greet each other? I.e. not the tourist. And one of the first things I learned in Chinese, if there's anybody here who speaks Mandarin, if I don't say it correctly, then please do correct me. Ni che le ma. And whenever I throw this phrase at a Mandarin speaker, they immediately smile because it means, have you eaten? And that's the way that two people in Beijing will greet each other when they meet. There's plenty of other stories I could tell you about me having tried my various levels of language proficiency in various situations. It has helped me. It has helped me to cross the border into Russia, to be able to just speak 20 words of Russian when suddenly the border guard smiled and was suddenly fluent in German, you know, and said, okay, well, then just sign here and off you go. So there's very practical benefits to it as well. But I think I'll stop here for a moment and let Richard go.
There are definitely a number of reasons why I continue to study languages. Obviously, deepening and broadening my knowledge of languages that interconnect and relate to each other is one that for me is fundamental. So understanding where words come from, and I find it really helps to actually help my English and improves my knowledge of the English language, because sometimes I'll come across a word that I'd never heard in English before, but it's a common word in another language, and in English it might be something that's used in some very obscure literary form or poetry or something that's been used. And I've had many occasions where I would come across words like that, you know, I don't know what the translation is. And then when I look in a dictionary, it's actually the same word. But the other thing, I think the common thing for many of us, and why language is something that as a human race, we all identify with language. We all understand language to a degree. It's one of the only subjects that people will always talk about on a bus or on a train. It was something that will unite us. And we always try to find commonality between how we speak and how they speak and the differences. And I think that general interest is something that possibly is intensified in me, in that I want to do that to sort of the nth degree. And so it started off with playing with accents and dialects within my own language. My original accent and dialect is Scouse, and I sort of broadened out from there, and I've been to university in another part of the UK, and I've lived in the south of England, and my family's originally from North Wales as well. So I have all of these different influences going on. And what I find is when you can converse with people on their level and in their way, then you make these more meaningful human connections. And that for me is just something quite magical. I'll just give you one story. I studied British Sign Language many, many years ago, and I'd not used it for a long time. And what happened was I was back in the UK on visiting my family, and I had to catch the bus down to London to get my flight back to the Balkans. And I was there, and there was a lady waiting for the bus, and it was around midnight. It was an overnight bus, so a real grueler in terms of a trip. And she couldn't speak, but she could sign. And she was telling me she was going to London. This is London, where it's the noise. That means noise and London in British Sign Language. And we were going on the coach, and she didn't have her ticket, or she wasn't sure about her ticket. And when the bus driver arrived, nothing was open. The ticket office was closed, and I was the only one who could really be the conduit with my poor BSL to help this poor lady get on the bus and to go to London. And it just gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling inside when you can experience something like that through learning a language, even to a basic level. And so, yeah, I've had a number of experiences like that, but I think that just spurs me on and keeps me going as well.
Thank you very much. It proves how useful and exciting it is to learn new languages. Both of you have learned quite a lot of languages, and can you tell us about your learning experience, or how you had any routines for learning? Because when one thinks about learning, I don't know, maybe 8, 10 languages, for the common citizen, maybe something that's not unreachable, but not so easy. So can you tell us about your experience learning and the routines or the tips to learn a new language?
Yeah, I think my top tip that I give to people when I'm asked is say what you can say. And that's maybe not immediately obvious what it means, but some people will, when they approach a new language, especially if it's the first foreign language, they'll go and they'll want to say an exact sentence, and then they'll start to translate, and they'll think about, oh, how am I going to say this, and then 5 minutes later they come out with the second situation thing that's obsolete. Whereas they could have maybe said something similar, which would completely also have dealt with what they wanted to express or what they needed or whatever. And but you know, if they just tweaked it a little. So say what you can say. That's what I try to do. You know, say something meaningful, but something that you know the words for. So pretty obvious, but it's helped me certainly. Also, when you learn new words and phrases, imagine what they mean rather than trying to translate back and forth. I think that really helps. You know, if you have the phrase, the boy's eating a sandwich, and imagine the boy eating a sandwich. Well,
sorry, Andreas, we have a problems with your microphone, and we cannot hear you properly.
Apologies. Is this better now?
Yes, that's better.
I'm really sorry.
No problem.
Yes.
Mucho mejor ahora. Continue.
Yes.
Maybe, sorry about it, but maybe you could explain what you have said, because it's the last couple of minutes we didn't understand.
Yeah. I'm so sorry.
No problem.
Yes. Well, my top tip is say what you can say. So quite often, you know, it might sound pretty obvious, but rather than trying to translate an exact sentence into a foreign language, I often, especially if I'm conversing in a language that I'm not fully proficient in, I just try and think of something that I can say in this situation which vaguely expresses what I want to say, and then that often does the trick, you know, rather than to try and exactly translate. Also, try and imagine what a sentence means when you learn a new sentence structure or new words, new meanings. Try and imagine what they mean rather than, again, you know, translating exactly, because only then are you going to really absorb the language, and it helps you to answer more quickly. What I've often done is to converse with myself. If I'm at home, I might sometimes do it out loud. Obviously, if I'm sitting on a bus or a train, I might just do it quietly. And last not least, I guess, again, to reiterate, making mistakes is okay. I've made horrendous mistakes. And yeah, that's okay. It's part of the joy of learning languages.
Yes, but you said that you speak to yourself. Who corrects you, or you? Well, how do you know it is right or not when you had said?
Well, that's a problem, Pedro. You don't, is the short answer, I guess. But I did find it helps, and over time you will correct yourself. You know, if you keep at it. Of course, ideally, you want to go and do a course at the Instituto Cervantes or at the Alliance Française or Instituto Dante Alighieri. But so I'm not saying that this should replace a course. But what I'm saying is, in addition to a course, if you're standing in a queue, if you're waiting for the bus, you know, why not try and imagine the conversation that you're having with your next door, your neighbor, the neighbor next to you in the queue.
Thank you.
So, thank you for the question. there are a few truths when it comes to language learning that are definitely constants for me in my journey. The first thing I would say that it's focusing in the very beginning on the words and the stuff that you actually need to know because it's relevant to your life. So if you get to a point where you're talking about sort of what you do or about your family, there's no point focusing in the very beginning on learning all of the son-in-laws, daughter-in-laws, great Aunt Megs, if you don't have any of those relations in your family. Focus just on the ones you've got, because otherwise you'll find that the vocabulary that you have to learn is so big that it becomes overwhelming. So always keep it to what you need so that you're going to be repeating that information over and over again and to the point that it becomes automatic. Language learning is overlearning. It's learning something to the point that you can say it in your sleep. You don't even need to think about it anymore in an active way. That's when you internalize language. The only way to get to that point when you've got the language that you're going to learn is to repeat the action many, 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 many times. So you need to constantly review, constantly try and use as much as you can the language that you're trying to learn. And if you do that, you'll find that the language will seep into you. There is no, unfortunately, there's no automatic osmosis when it comes to learning a language. It's not something like, you know, a subject where you can grab a book and just reference it in the middle of a conversation. Language has to be internalized completely. And the only way to do that is by exposing yourself to the language every single day, as far as you can. Now, that could be some days when you're not feeling very well, or you just don't feel motivated, or you're feeling a bit depressed, or you have just a lot to do. It could end up turning into a 5-minute quick review so that you feel that you've just had a look at and touched base with the language. Sometimes that happens to me too, and that's absolutely fine. Sometimes though, it's good to take the time you have, set in your, we all have these smartphones, right? That sometimes feel a little bit less smart than their name, but they do have a great calendar in them that you can set yourself a specific time during the day to do the language study. I find that if you say to yourself, I'll do half an hour of study each day, and you don't say exactly when that's going to be, it ends up sliding until you get to bedtime. You're too tired, you can't focus, you go to sleep, you've missed a day, and then you beat yourself up about it and you feel bad. The way to not have that happen is to just make sure that you've allotted time, usually before another activity. And then you say, before I do this, I'm going to do my language study. And that really, really helps just psychologically. If you get to a point where you feel that you need a break, it's all too much, agree the break with yourself. Don't allow that to be a thing that just develops. Make sure you say to yourself, I'm taking 2 weeks off. I need a holiday. I need a break, and do that. Because if you don't do that and you just allow it to slide, that's where the negative emotions come in. And for motivation, it's really key to be positive in language learning. It's a marathon, not a sprint. It takes years to get where you want to be, and you will get there.
Thank you very much. Yes, and the next question is related to your experience also, but what is the most challenging aspect? Because each one has his own method or tips or way to improve or to learn a new language, but there are always challenges aspects. Which were the most challenging aspects for you when you learn the languages?
I think it's that marathon which Richard has just described. Unless you have, you're lucky enough to be able to go and live with a family that speaks the language all day. In that case, it might actually feel more like a sprint. And I think, Richard, you've done that with German, as far as I read from your blog. But otherwise, I often find if I approach it in a more conventional style, by visiting a class or doing an online course or whatever, I find that often my language skills develop along a similar kind of graph. And it tends to go fairly quickly at the beginning, where you learn a few phrases, and you feel that after a few classes, oh yeah, you're able to have this simple conversation, and it makes you feel really good. But it's the same conversation you're having every single time, and then you kind of reach a plateau, and you're along this plateau, and you're learning all these new words, and you're learning new structures and phrases, but you're still not able to have this independent conversation. And then until one day suddenly, you find yourself in an Italian restaurant or whatever, or you speak to somebody at the street corner in Spanish, and suddenly you realize you're able to have this independent conversation, and then you go up a step on the ladder, but you're still far from being able to use English in a use the language in a professional capacity, and again, that takes a long time, and you go up this ladder until one day you reach that plateau as well. So it's but I think my advice would be, and it's one that I give myself when I feel I'm on this ladder bit, just enjoy it. Just enjoy the fact that you have the opportunity to learn new words, and just one day it'll magically fall into place. That's my experience anyway.
So I think there are very different issues for each individual language that we can face. Some languages, it will be the pronunciation. We will find it quite difficult to pronounce certain sounds because they're not within our usual sound range that we normally use. So unless you're very fortunate to have Scouse as your natural dialect like me, and you all already have these sounds in our language, it's unfortunately for the rest of the world, it's a little bit more difficult. We're sort of a big advantage in Liverpool. But what you can do is train the pronunciation. So when I was at university, I was studying Swedish, and we spent an entire year studying how to pronounce Swedish, because there are so many vowel sounds and that we just don't have in English. And our teacher said to us, even if you don't speak Swedish by the end of this course, you will be able to pronounce the IKEA catalog perfectly. So what we did, and I found this to be very, very useful, and it's the advice I always give, is if you want to really get used to a sound and be able to produce a sound, record yourself. I know it sounds awful. You listen to yourself and you go, oh no, do I really sound like that? But it really helps. You can listen to an original recording, whether it's from a course that you're following, whether it's from a snippet from another recording from YouTube or somewhere else with the language, and you then try to pronounce it in the same way. Don't be worried about putting on the voice or the accent, as my grandma used to say when she picked up the phone, and she'd go, hello, and then she'd go, all right, love, have you got, and then she'd turn around and speak completely differently. And many Brits will know that, that sort of idea of putting on the voice. Putting on the voice sometimes is absolutely necessary. It can feel a bit weird, it can feel a bit strange, but it's all part of the learning language process. And you can do it if you start doing this recording. You can also talk to your teachers and talk to people who speak the language and ask them where sounds are made. So for example, if you're having problems with a ch sound, ask them if there's a vibration. Where is there a vibration on your throat when you make that sound? Where's the tongue in your mouth? Which position is it in? Is it behind your teeth? Is it at the roof of your mouth? Is there a trill? Where's the air coming out? So if you're trying to say in Welsh, you have to put the tip of your tongue, the front of your teeth like this, and the air comes out the sides. And if you start describing what's going on, you can start picking up those things. When it comes to grammar and vocabulary, that can be a little bit more tricky. So once you've got the sounds down, you can then focus on actually saying words. Now, some words in some languages become a little bit tricky because they have consonant clusters, like in the Slavic languages. Like you'll have a word like prst in Czech for finger, and of course you hear prst and you're like, where are the vowels? And they've all disappeared. But again, it takes time to get those. And bear in mind that if you are putting these sounds that are alien to you together for the first time, it's also going to take you an additional amount of time to memorize those words and to make those words then become automatic in your speech. But you will get there. And what you need to focus on is saying them in sentences that are meaningful to you so that you get that repetition I was talking about before. Because only in that way will the grammar and will the vocabulary become normal and natural. This is sort of looking at comprehensible input and then using that comprehensible input to create meaningful sentences for you. The grammar, I find, tends to fit into this. So looking at tables of declensions and in Russian or in German is possibly a lot less useful than actually hearing it in situ in a sentence that you can learn parrot fashion. And then you build them up slowly but surely over time.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. So it's my questions now. So I wanted to ask you both, Andreas and Richard. So we talked a lot about the linguistic aspect of your language learning, but I wanted to ask, what is the place of the non-linguistic aspects of the language learning in your experience? And especially, do you feel that understanding the culture is important was important when you improve your skills?
Absolutely. I think the two are married together and can't really be separated. I've got a little printout hanging in my office, what the British say and what the British mean. And I just love it. So there's one sentence on there, for example, I hear what you say, and a German would understand. If hearing the sentence, I hear what you say, a German would think, oh, he agrees with me. Whereas I hear what you say actually means, well, I hear what you say, but I don't agree. So yeah, language and the culture can't really be separated, I think. I also like a quote by Ludwig Wittgenstein, which is often quoted in language circles: the limits of my language mean the limits of my world. And I think that's just a very nice quote, you know, because every language has a different Weltanschauung, if I may quote this German word, which you often find in British newspapers, worldview. Every language has its own worldview. And to give you just one tiny example, which I love from the Gaelic language, in Gaelic, grass is blue. Grass isn't green, grass is blue, and there's nothing to do with bluegrass. But if you think about it, if grass is really very saturated, you know, it's got a little blue shimmer to it. And also what we in English consider brown bread is actually red bread in Gaelic. So the whole color spectrum is essentially different, is what I'm trying to say. So you can't separate language from culture.
I agree that you can't. Language I see as being the vehicle of culture. So a lot of idioms, a lot of turns of phrase, ways of using language are definitely intrinsically connected to the communities that use those languages. And sometimes you can learn a language, and if you just learn it in a translation, when you go to put that translation together in the country where the language is commonly spoken on a daily basis, you can sometimes find that there's a disconnect between what's in your head and what they understand. And I've definitely had that experience myself in the Balkans, particularly because there's a lot of influence from Turkish, and in turn from Arabic and Persian. So the mindset and the way you go about explaining things is quite different. So things in English where you can sometimes piece together a history of what happened in the past just by certain words that I might choose in English. You can make the story up in your head. I don't need to be very explicit in my recounting a certain story or something. Whereas in Macedonian, I have to really set the scene. It's a bit like British Sign Language as well. British Sign Language does this. You really need to set the scene of what it is. So if you're going to walk over a bridge, you have to put the bridge in first, because if you don't put the bridge in first, you fall into the river. And that kind of phrasing and understanding what the scene is definitely different for each culture, and how you then go about communicating what you want to say. And to give you another example, sometimes some words will carry meanings that you will not be aware of because of culture. So if I were to say to you in French, c'est abominable, abominable. If I say to you in English, it's abominable, how many of you were thinking of a snowman? Because the word abominable in English is linked to a snowman. It's not in French. So if you get to a book and you're translating abominable in French, never choose the word abominable in English, because even though it is a direct translation, it will just make people laugh.
When we talk in Spanish, el abominable hombre de las nieves.
Okay. Thank you. That's an interesting example. I didn't know that about English. And so both of you are speaking so many languages. So you are fluent in so many languages. But do you keep? I was wondering if you keep studying languages where you feel fluent in, and how do you maintain, more generally, how do you maintain your skills in one language?
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I'm very sad to say. For example, French in particular, I was once much better at my French than I am now. But sadly, in Scotland, I've not used French in a long time. And I recently realized when visiting France that, yeah, it's still there, you know, and I can have every conversation, but it's not at the tip of my tongue. I actually need to work my brain. So that was a very sad realization. So I guess the thing is, you just have to use every opportunity you get. And if you don't have any, then you have to create them. There's so many online chat forums you can use. For example, for Russian, I've joined an online conversation class, and I found that very useful. Again, for Russian, I have used a podcast, which I found very helpful, especially because podcasts have the advantage you can hear them again when you're on the bus, or when, as in my case, when I'm cycling, when I'm riding my bike. And when I'm riding my bike, nobody even cares if I actually repeat what I hear, which I quite often do. So those are things. Listen to the radio, of course, as well. And even if nothing else, the advantages of Netflix and Amazon Prime is that you can now watch films in almost any language. Well, not any, but in many major languages. And yeah, that's when my brain is really wanting to switch off, then I put on a Russian or a Portuguese film, you know, and that kind of, at least, I hope it works subconsciously.
I think we are in a very fortunate time when we can create linguistic bubbles around the world. So gone are the days where you move to another part of the world and you leave the old language or languages behind. We can now exist in basically any linguistic community we want. At the moment, I'm learning Cornish, and I connect with other Cornish learners and speakers, mainly in the UK, but there are some in other countries as well. And we practice Cornish a few times a week. And that kind of thing is only possible because of technology. And this is how I go about using my languages for work. I use my languages for my normal day job, and I use a number of them. I have to read in many languages and listen to a number of languages. But also, my life is basically structured in a way now where languages are just at the core of it. To exist, I have to speak a number of languages. I'm in the Balkans, so at home we speak 5 languages: English, Macedonian, French, Spanish, and German. With my daughter, I speak 4, and with my wife, I speak Macedonian. And then when I go outside, I have to use Albanian and Turkish. If I listen to the radio, if I get jokes from my friends here, they're often in Serbian or Croatian. If I go down the road in the car, in 20 minutes, I'm at the border with Kosovo, so I speak Albanian again there. And if I go down the road the other way to the east, I'm in Bulgaria in about an hour or so, and I'm speaking Bulgarian. If I go south, I'm in Greece in an hour and a half, 2 hours. I'm in Thessaloniki, and I use Greek. So a lot of my languages are used just by the sheer fact that I'm here and where I travel. I also love to get involved in as you said in the beginning, when you introduced me, the polyglot conference is something I set up because I wanted to be able to be with other people who love lots and lots of languages. And people who are starting out as well. It's not just for people who are learning multiple languages, but for people who are learning 1 or 2 languages. And to connect with other people who love languages and to practice them together. So we get a lot of opportunities to do that. And that's a really big way that I can keep them going. Some languages do go rusty, it's natural. I mean, if you don't use it, you lose it. And it's true. I mean, I've studied languages in the past, like Latvian and Finnish, where I studied them to a point and then I could sort of start getting my thoughts across in those languages. But then I came back to the Balkans and you never hear them, and there are only so many hours in the day. So you do tend to get rusty. Where I find in my own personal journey is I focused very much on Germanic languages, Romance languages, and Slavic languages. So those languages tend to intersect all the time. So if I continually speak Spanish, I find that I can keep my Catalan alive to a fair degree just by sheer, sort of practice of another language that's similar. Or the same with German. If I'm speaking German, I can still go back to Dutch or Swedish because the languages are connected. And that's what helps.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have many other questions, but I think it's time for maybe letting people have the occasion to ask their own questions. So I leave the floor to Carlos. Carlos and Lucille. So if you in the audience, if you have some questions, please don't hesitate to write them down in the chat, and Carlos and Lucille will ask them to our speakers. Thank you.
Thanks, Ebert. Thanks to Richard and Andreas. We have a lot of questions. in the chat. We are going to start with Marta Rodriguez, who said, we are Spaniards living in London, therefore our daughters are learning Spanish at home and English at the school. Thing is, they are now 5 years old and learning how to read and write English at the school. Should they also learn how to write and read in Spanish at the same time? Or it is better that they need to secure English first and then think about the Spanish in a few years' time, to not confuse them with the both languages. I will appreciate your input. You guys are extraordinary. It is amazing to be a polyglot. Many thanks.
Richard, do you want to take this one, because you have children which you have experience, whom you have experience with?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm happy to answer this. It's a very good question, and I know it can be tempting as a parent to sort of get your child to do everything all at once. Definitely there are children who are able to do that without much of an issue. They look to do that. Every child is different. Every child has a different personality. When it comes to Spanish, it's a pretty easy language to read and write compared to English, because you don't have to have spelling tests in a Spanish school to know how to spell a word. Basically, you spell it as you say it. So it does make Spanish that much easier if you already speak it. English, on the other hand, has an awful lot of very strange things about it, because it's such a hodgepodge of lots of different languages mixed together. And so spelling it and reading it takes time. It might be nice for them to really get into English first in terms of reading and writing, carry on the speaking of Spanish, reading to them in Spanish maybe, and letting them see the words, but maybe not forcing it too much. See how they feel. I think children will also get a sense of, I want to try reading it too. Often there's not a problem with doing it, but it's good to just sort of keep track and see how they get on. They will learn to read and write Spanish at some point anyway. I didn't force my daughter to learn multiple languages to read and write in the beginning. I allowed her to just go through the school system in a natural way. And I found that she did pick up the languages in their written forms later, quite naturally.
Thank you, Richard. So the next question is also for you. A question from Timothy, who asks, how did your experience of learning sign language differ from that of learning spoken language?
Wow, that's a really good question, because I was expecting it to be completely different. I thought that I would be at no advantage learning a sign language because I'd learned a number of spoken languages. I mean, in neuroscience, there is a difference between the two modalities of communication, whether it's spoken form or sign language. And they are different, apparently, when it comes to the brain. What I found was I could pick up signs quite quickly because of my sort of idea of knowing different grammatical structures and how languages would express themselves in different ways. So I was able to sort of make that leap of, this is not English, this is a different grammar and a different language. I found it quite enjoyable and a lot less intensive in terms of learning than say a written language where you have to read lots and lots and listen lots and lots to get the words in. You find that you've got a sign that you use, and once you've learned the sign, you basically have to practice it a lot to get it right and to remember it. But once you've done that and you go to a class, it's quite nice and easy to move forward, and it's actually quite a fun process. So if anybody's out there watching this, and I can really recommend learning sign language. I think it's a brilliant thing to do. I did have a problem when I went to learn Macedonian Sign Language, which I started doing just before the pandemic, and unfortunately my classes were cancelled. Some of the signs are completely different. I mean, each sign language has a different grammar and different words because they're different languages, as spoken languages are very different, so are sign languages. Some are related vaguely, but like spoken languages, but I did find that to be quite challenging, going for a second sign language.
Thanks, Richard. We have another question for both of you. The question is for Julia. Have you ever felt embarrassed about language having a speaking different language with an accent in a foreign land?
I guess no is the answer. And that is out of pure ignorance. Because if you're speaking with an accent, you're not aware of the fact that you're speaking with an accent because you give it your best. Well, at least I try to. I know that some people, some people will come up to me and say, and I've only just said hi, and they'll say, "Oh, you must be German." How the heck, I've only said hi. And then again, on other occasions, I'll talk for 10 minutes and they'll not believe I'm not whatever the language is. So I'm not sure if my accent varies or if people's perception of my accent varies. I don't know, but what I do know is that my accent when speaking English, for example, was a lot stronger for many years. And I thought it was great. So out of pure ignorance, I thought I was doing a great job. And no, so I didn't feel embarrassed. Now I know better.
I think having an accent is completely normal. And even if we can sort of pass as a speaker of a language from a certain place for a while, there's always going to come a point in a conversation where we've not lived the same experiences as people who have grown up there or been through the school system there or have family from that place. So to what end are you going to want to sound exactly like a person from a specific place? Are you going to want to sound like a spy when that comes out eventually? Or, so an accent sometimes can be quite a nice thing to have because it gets rid of that who are you and where are you from feeling and that sort of suspicion. So it can be a badge of, I have this other identity too. I have this other background. And it can become a talking point in its own right that fades away, it melts away over time. It's not so important. You maybe talk about that for the first couple of conversations. It might come up every now and again if something, if someone talks about Brexit, for example, anywhere in Europe, but it's not a constant topic of conversation. When I go out with Macedonian friends, we don't talk about me being British constantly. We just have a conversation about what's going on, about local politics, about the weather, about, what our kids are doing at school, just normal things, things that have happened to us. And it never ends up being the big issue. So having a bit of an accent is not the issue. Pronunciation is the key thing. So if you pronounce the language in a way that's understandable, that's absolutely fine. As long as people can understand what you're saying, that's the main thing. And that should always be the main goal. One of the best speakers of English as a second language that I met was one of my Spanish teachers at school. She had the thickest, broadest Spanish accent you can imagine when she spoke. She made 2 mistakes constantly. One of them was, I'm going to pass the register to take the register every day. And she always said it. And I thought it was absolutely adorable because her command of the language was amazing. She had a vocabulary in English that was just, it way surpassed many monolingual English speakers that I'd ever met. And I was just in awe. And she had this very thick Spanish accent. And why not? It's beautiful.
Sylviana had another question for you both. Have you noticed an increase in the British people's interest in learning other languages?
I'm not sure that I have a representative picture, in my little world, yes, but then in my little world means, yeah, there's loads of people starting to learn the Gaelic language, because that's just the bubble I kind of live in. But whether that actually translates nationally, I would be doubtful. And actually, I'm seeing in the next question, how could we improve language learning in England? Well, in England, I don't know, but in Scotland, I think the Scottish government is trying to do just that. They've adopted this 1+2 policy, whereby every child in school is eventually meant to be learning two languages that are not native to them. I think more widely, it's also a question of what kind of status do we give languages in education, essentially. For example, in Germany, an Abitur, or A-levels, hires, which you do in languages, like myself. I did English and French as my main two subjects in my hires qualification, and that it's as valid as any other hire, unlike in France, where a university entrance qualification in languages is worth less than a baccalaureate in science or maths. So I think that's also something that I would think needs to improve.
As an organizer of a language event, I do see quite a lot of people come from the UK and the US, and you know, unfortunately, English speakers were often labeled with this, where we're not very good at languages, or we don't learn many languages, and it's kind of something that we also accept. It's a mantle that we're almost all too ready to put on and sort of walk around town wearing. But people do, and I think there are definitely, with the internet and with applications on the phone, more and more people do learn bits of languages. When it comes to school-age children, it can be a little bit more problematic, I think, because they've got lots of other things that they're learning. They've got their own social dynamics that are going on. And the thing that's very different within Europe that I've noticed is, if you take a family from Italy, France, Germany, and the UK, and they all have a child at school learning a foreign language, and they go on holiday, the thing that all of these families have in common is that they all live in countries where the main language that they speak at home is the dominant language. German is a very dominant language in Germany. Italian is a very dominant language in Italy. Spanish is a very dominant language in most of Spain. English in the United Kingdom is a very dominant language. And what I mean by that is that they tend to dub TV in all of those countries. So you don't hear the language on in any other language on TV often. They tend to just speak their language on a day-to-day basis, unless they work or live in a specific area where there may be foreigners that come in. And so, but when they go abroad, and they all have the same problems at school when they learn a language, they find it quite challenging. The pronunciation is difficult. They tend to have difficulties acquiring, you know, an accent more similar to somebody who's from an English-speaking country or something like that. And the same goes from the UK, right? We have an issue with trying to pronounce things sometimes in a way that's more akin to the accent of the country, of the language we're learning. The very big difference between all of those countries is, if they all go on holiday to Turkey or to Thailand or wherever they choose in the world, which language do they all use as a means of communication? English is very often the language they're going to use. The French child, the Italian child, the German child, the Spanish child, and the British child will all learn very, very quickly from a young age that when they go to another country, they speak English. The key difference is in the United Kingdom, English is already the dominant language. So they no longer see the relevance for why am I learning the other languages? So as educators, I think it's really important, and as parents, it's really important to take them to the countries where the other languages are spoken, to teach them what they need to know, and also to show them other benefits of learning these languages. Now, if you learn any of these languages we've got represented here today, whether it's German, whether it's French, whether it's Italian, whether it's Spanish, there are huge benefits for English speakers learning any of these languages to improve their English. You can better understand English literature if you study these Romance languages to a high degree, because you have access to a Latinate vocabulary that's used in very high level English. German helps you get in touch with how the base grammar works in English, why you say, if you have any problems, please reach out to Sandra or me and not I, because German shows you the grammatical structures behind that, why you need to use me or I in certain contexts. And if you go through these sort of reasonings with children and help them to understand that as well, and even as adults, I think it really helps to win that fight of getting the motivation there, getting people behind learning a language. And it's not just about, it's not pretending and make something they know, pretending that they're going to use it all the time. They've been on holiday, they know. So it's actually dealing with the reality of where we are in the world and what real tangible benefits that it can bring. Talk about the neurology, talk about how it affects the brain, talk about the studies that go on in neuroscience to show you that it can offset dementia. Talk about, you know, the benefits of being able to think in a different way, being able to view the world in a different way. Talk about the benefits of being able to watch the news from a different point of view and not just get fed the news that we see in the UK or in another country. You can then understand a different point of view and see things from another side. In history, there's at least 3 sides to every story, if not many, many more.
Thanks, Richard and Andreas. We have time for a couple of more questions. And the next one is Moni, that she wants to add another 2 languages to her knowledge. So she asks, what do you think are the most important languages to learn in 2021?
Well, I think Richard has just given a list, which I would second. But I think the question, Moni, is, I don't know where you live. I don't know what your work is. I don't know what where you holiday. So there's a lot of you know, factors to take into account. But I would also just add one other little thought. Other than thinking of countries where people holiday, I take it you maybe live in the UK, so I guess it's mostly France, Spain, and Italy. So those are, you know, 3 very good choices. You could also look at it from a professional point of view. You know, where do you want to work? You know, if it's in the United Nations, possibly French is your first choice. If you if you want to work within the EU, German might not be a bad idea, because it's the most widely spoken language in Europe. Sorry, I said one last thought, but this is the last thought. Why not choose a smaller language? If you live in Manchester, why not pick up Welsh? Or if you live in Scotland, why not pick up Gaelic?
Yeah, I just saw that Moni has added that they're in Paris and speak all the main European languages and works as a sales manager. So given that additional information,
Oh, have we lost Richard?
Maybe, it seems so.
Maybe,
Yes.
yeah, it seems, yeah, a bad connection.
So, all right, so Moni already speaks a lot of languages. Okay,
Yeah.
now that kind of changes the picture entirely. Well, if you live in Paris and speak all main European languages, then why don't you learn Breton? I think it's a very beautiful language. Sadly, France has what I would describe as it's certainly a language policy which isn't encouraging minorities, let's put it that way. But I spent some time in Brittany 2 or 3 years ago and thought it was a very charming culture. So why not learn Breton? And it's not that far from Paris.
I must have got cut off, unfortunately. Thank you for taking up the challenge of answering that, Andreas. I appreciate it. I was just going to add that if you speak the major languages already, like German, and you're interested in career moves, when I first started working, I was actually quite surprised at just how many positions required me to speak Swedish and Dutch. And I think the reason is because those languages, where even though they speak very good English, what they find is that when they are dealing with people and they're sitting at home or internally within the countries, they would like to do business in their own languages too. And they don't necessarily want to speak English constantly throughout their entire day. So I found that those two languages were very accessible from German. Swedish, actually, I learned before German, but Dutch, I learned after German, and I found it quite accessible and quite a rewarding language to learn. Other languages that you might want to get into might be, sort of delving into some Eastern European languages. You might want to look at Romanian if you've done the major Western European languages. I think that there are a number of ways you can go, but they would be my picks.
Well, thank you very much, Richard and Andreas. Unfortunately, we are already at 7:15, and we know Andreas has to leave us very soon because Andreas has a TV broadcast at 7:30, if I remind well. So I don't know if Manuela, Pedro, if you want to say a last word, and I just say maybe thank you very much, Richard and Andreas, again for joining us tonight. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. I'm sorry we couldn't take all the questions. It's a huge topics, but I hope you had a very nice evening, and thank you very much to the Dante and Cervantes for organizing that with us.
If I can add something with my very strong accent, now I feel better after this evening. I believe that if anyone has the intention of contacting Andreas and Richard directly through their blog or whatever and pose some question, they will be very happy to reply.
In fact, I do a live YouTube and Instagram event at 6 p.m. Central European time, which is 5 p.m. UK time, every Sunday. And I answer language questions and talk about a certain topic for 30 minutes. And then I answer any questions in lots of languages. And you're all very, very welcome to join and follow me on social media.
I would like also to thank you, Andreas, and to stress the importance that we have seen to learn language, and the message from all of us. I think it would be like, it's never too late, or you are never too old to start a new language. I just have started to learn Italian 2 weeks ago, so everybody can at any time to learn a new language. Thank you very much. It was really great.
Grazie a tutti. Thank you for being with us. Grazie e buona serata.